Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Scott Mackey, Senior Vice President, Customer Experience, and Lewis Aguilera, Solutions Consultant at Adlib Software Canada, who will be talking to you today about how to do more with SharePoint by leveraging unstructured data. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC19. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is packed with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link. Take the lead and join us at ESPC 19. Call for speakers is closing at 6 p.m. CET on Monday, 11th of March. See sharepointeurope.com for full details. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Scott and Lewis in the question window. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Scott Mackey. Hello, Scott.
Good morning, Shane. How are you?
I'm great. I can see your screen there with the presentation. So, yep, take it away.
Okay, perfect. So thanks everybody for joining our webinar this morning. As Shane indicated, we're joining you from the frosty north of Canada, where it's about minus 12 degrees Celsius. So hopefully it's a little warmer where you are. But we're going to walk through a couple of PowerPoint slides. We've actually got a quick animation as part of this, and then Luis is actually going to go through a live demo of the technology, which is always risky when you're talking about webinars, but we're going to give that a shot anyway. So the topic today is doing more with SharePoint by leveraging your unstructured data. I'm going to highlight this as we go through the presentation, but when I talk about unstructured data, another phrase for that might be unstructured documents. And what we're talking about here is all of the massive volumes of content that organizations have got that are email, MS Office, CAD, spreadsheets, all of that sort of unstructured document formats, a lot of which gets brought into SharePoint, but a lot of it exists outside of SharePoint as well in file shares and other repositories, whether those are on-prem or in the cloud. So part of what we're going to talk about today is a number of related use cases, getting content cleaned up and enriched and into SharePoint, but also we'll touch on a couple of other use cases as well. And as Shane pointed out, we encourage people to throw questions into the Q&A section so that we can answer those at the end, and certainly we're happy to follow up with any questions that people might have as well. So here's what we look like. Scott and Luis are your hosts for the morning. For the next 45 minutes or so. From an agenda perspective, I want to talk a little bit briefly about Adlib and Microsoft. It's a great partnership, but just touch on that and give it a bit of context as well. Microsoft talks about the 4 pillars from the new content services approach, so I'll touch on that. And then I want to dive into this notion of better data for digital business. And then we'll do a demo, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that the technology can do. And obviously, this is our technology, but conceptually, it's the kind of things that we want people to be thinking about when they're talking about moving content around within their organizations. And then we'll also emphasize a little bit about the business impact. I believe most of the people on the call today are probably more technically oriented, but I believe a lot of you, especially in this day and age, have certainly got an eye into the business demands that your different line of business owners have as well. So we'll talk a little bit about business impact, and then of course a Q&A. So when I talk about Adlib and Microsoft, the center of this diagram here is maybe something that you've seen at the recent Microsoft events around the content services program, where they talk about creation, coordination, protection, and harvesting of content. And for Adlib, we're one of the charter members of the content services program. And where we focus in on are the create and harvest areas, specifically for content migration and capture. I highlighted here on the right at the bottom that we also play a role on the protection side, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's really around the ability to detect and remediate some of that sensitive data that you might have either in SharePoint or that you want to bring into SharePoint. So something like PII detection, and not just figuring out which content has PII in it, but also being able to remediate that content. And by that, I mean being able to create a redacted version of that content. The idea of GDPR is obviously a buzz around there. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves over the coming years. But essentially, organizations are struggling to basically get an insight into how much of their content actually contains PII risk, and then being able to do something about it. So that's a role that a technology such as Adlib can play. Back up to the top there around the migration, that's a big part of our story, the automation and enrichment of documents that are migrating between systems, including SharePoint, getting content out of file shares and other repositories, legacy or otherwise, and getting those into SharePoint. But instead of just extract, transfer, and load, sort of the lift and shift approach, we're talking about leveraging the opportunity to actually do more with the content. So clean up the rot, enhance the metadata, make the content more accessible and searchable so that it's more valuable once it's in SharePoint. From a capture perspective, capture means a lot of things to a lot of people, but essentially it's the fairly common assumption around that is OCR on stuff that's not searchable, so making non-searchable images, that kind of thing, or components of documents that are non-searchable, making them entirely searchable, but then being able to extract certain values or information from that. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But those are sort of the areas that Adlib plays and how we support SharePoint, the SharePoint ecosystem, essentially. So, we all see these headlines, but I wanted to just throw this in here. I mean, I think everybody on the call is aware that the whole world is going digital. The drive to become a digital business, essentially, the concept of digital transformation. But it's a challenge. But it's essentially something that every industry is not mandated to do, but is recognizing that they have to move in that direction. There's a couple of quotes here. Some are more generic, but the top one is around the oil and gas industry is actually waking up to become more digitally aware because they realize some of the benefits and efficiencies they can realize. Pharma, specifically, life sciences, specifically pharma and med devices, is obviously moving quickly in that direction. Healthcare, those sorts of areas. But it spans the globe. So manufacturing, government, everybody is sort of going digital. And to do this, it's not just a technology thing, it's actually access to the data that an organization has is really critical. So that's why we talk about this in the digital age of technology-driven transformation. Data is the competitive currency. I hesitate to use the word, data is the new oil. There's lots of articles that sort of dispute that, but essentially there are a lot of common truths in that if you don't have access to all of your data, you can't achieve some of the business objectives that you've got, whether that's accelerating customer response times, finding opportunities for new products and services, those kinds of things. It all relies on data. And to a great extent, the level of automation that you've got is essential because the volumes that you're dealing with are unmanageable otherwise, essentially. So when we talk about better data for digital business, we're talking about sort of addressing that problem where a lot of these digital transformation projects, the shine's coming off them a little bit, right? So these stats, around 50% of the executives believe that their company isn't successfully executing their strategies. They're sometimes going too big too quickly, start small and execute and then build on those successes. There's also 1 in 5 that say their company's digital transformation is a waste of time. I think those stats will change, but as we work with our analysts, so we work with Forrester and Gartner quite extensively, this is consistent with what we see from our customers, but also what these analysts are hearing from the market that they speak to as well. And one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the challenges here is that most of that data is hidden from the technology solutions that people are deploying. So RPA is a hot buzzword these days, robotic process automation, but there's these insight engines, there's the standard content services platforms. All of these things rely on data. And if you've only got access to part of it, then you're missing a big chunk of the opportunity. So when we go from, here we go. So the other piece of this, of course, that I'm kind of referring to is that, it depends on the stats, depends on what you believe, but I think there was an AIM study recently that I read that they actually went out and did survey companies because we always use the 80-20 thing, 75-25. The vast majority of content is unstructured. It's all these office files, emails, that kind of content that exist in an organization that has all kinds of hidden value and risk potentially. So, apply your own number there, but the message here is that the vast majority of the content flowing through and into an organization is in this unstructured document format. And it's untapped for the most part. So that's a big challenge for organizations, but with the right combination of people, process, and technology, you can actually tap into that resource within your organization. Clicker's not working there. And I mentioned this before, so it's a bit of a carrot and stick thing. So from a carrot perspective, there's a lot of value in that content. You know, you've got insights into your business, into past IP that you might have developed, into critical customer information that you might have. There's opportunities for process automation to deliver better customer journeys, essentially accelerate customer journeys. And there's new revenue opportunities. And again, this is fairly generically stated because we've got an audience that spans different industries here. But for example, you've got the energy companies might be tapping into some legacy research that they might have done on well files. What might not have been economically viable to actually mine a particular property 20 years ago, but now it is. Technology has improved. So if you have access to that data, to that research, then you can actually uncover some of those opportunities. More significant ones in the insurance and banking space, the whole know your customer, all the related things to that. The idea is that banks have really clear view into your recent transaction history, right? The stuff we do online, all of that is information stored in rows and tables in a database. That stuff is easier, I should say, to perform analytics on. But if you think of a bank or an insurance company, they've got decades worth of content on a particular customer. If they could tap into all of that and see the entire lifespan of a customer through the content that they have, there's going to be clear patterns and opportunities for them to deliver a better overall customer experience. So an example of that might be, you know, you've got a customer that opened their first bank account 30 years ago, then they did a student loan, they bought their first house, they bought their second house, they're clearly starting to shift their investments toward retirement. There's an opportunity, if you can see some of those patterns and insights, to actually be proactive about delivering some opportunities to them that are a delight for the customer, but is a new revenue opportunity for the company itself. That's kind of a banking example there. From a risk perspective, you know, risk gets funded. There's a lot of projects these days. You know, when you talk about GDPR, it's not just that, it's other kinds of compliance and regulations that force this. But if you don't have visibility into your content, there's a risk there. And the whole idea is that CEOs want to stay out of the news, right? So you don't want to have a data breach. You don't want to have somebody's personally identifiable information go out there. I didn't even bring up some of the articles. It probably would have taken me 30 seconds to find 10 different articles about a company that showed up in the news. And the real world impact of that, of course, is, you know, stock price drop, loss of customer confidence. There's a lot of challenges there that if you're not able to address the risk. And those are the sort of personal examples, the customer examples, but there's plenty of others where mortgages will sell a package of loans to another organization and quite unknowingly send off a bunch of bad debt that may be mixed in there just because they don't have visibility into the content in there. Some of the big banks we work with are actually doing things like analysis of their contracts over the course of many years, where they're looking to go back over decades worth of contracts and pull out party A, party B, and legal clauses, those kinds of things, again, to get better insight into the content that they have so they understand what risk they have with the different contracts that they have in their possession. And yeah, lost revenue, obviously nobody wants to get called out, show up in the news and end up with the regulatory fines. In the States, living will type stuff, the SEC regulations is big. Certainly in Europe, there's lots of regulations around GDPR and others. But, you know, there's basically the message here is that there's a carrot and stick benefit to having clear insight into all of your unstructured content, all of your content really, but tapping into both the structured and unstructured essentially. So when we talk about what we're after, it's really about delivering greater access to high quality data in an efficient way. You know, very marketing type terms. What we mean behind that is, actually I've got another another slide that goes into this, I think after this, but we're talking about going deeper into the content that you've got. So tapping into all the different sources through the different connectors and things, file shares, repositories, legacy systems. So you've got broad access to all of these different content repositories, but also all the different formats within them. You know, I mentioned the most common ones, Office, CAD, email, those kinds of things, but those span versions of those applications. There's multiple languages involved, multiple generations of these different formats. So providing broad-based access to this content is an essential component. Then quality is another key thing too. It's sort of the garbage in, garbage out. The concept of creating high quality data. If you're leaving a bunch of junk in there, then you're going to choke some of the downstream processes. So what I'm talking about there are things like removing the rot, so the redundant, obsolete, and trivial content, so that that's not getting fed into the system downstream. It's just noise. It frustrates users when they're looking for stuff. It complicates the insight engines. They're giving false positives because they got an incorrect clarity of vision in terms of the content that they've got access to. But it gets right down into the content itself as well. I'll give you a quick use case example. a customer doing sort of 500 million pages a year, processing that into high quality data that gets fed into an analytics engine. In this case, it's Watson. But essentially, one of the things that they found was that a lot of these contracts had headers and footers on them. That was sort of dirty elements to the data that was being fed in, because the header and footer was sort of skewing some of the results. So the ability to clean that stuff up, clean off the header and footer as irrelevant pieces of information within the document so that you're feeding higher quality data is a key thing. From an efficiency perspective, that's really where we touch on the idea of automation. Forgive the spell check issue there, efficient. Anyway, the idea there is that dealing with the massive volumes and variety of content that you've got, you really need a high degree of automation here. So having a platform that can basically deal with that broad volume, can deal with all of the different quality concerns that people have, and do it in a scalable way that can, process millions, billions, terabytes of files over the course of a project or the course of a business as usual process is a really important consideration as well. There's lots of point tools out there, but you really need to think about this as a platform that can support not just one use case, but multiple use cases. And as you know, with SharePoint, there's all kinds of different applications for it within an organization that span different lines of business. So what I wanted to do, this is a really short video, and it's not going to replace Luis's fantastic demo that's coming up here, but I did want to play just a quick video for you. Again, it's less than 2 minutes, but it gives you a little bit of a picture of what Adlib does. So I'll let this play here. Let me just get it into full screen for you.
In today's data-driven world, adapting to the digital demands of the global market can be difficult. Considering that over 80% of corporate data is locked in documents, it is becoming increasingly vital to discover, cleanse, and enrich these data resources. Why? Because companies who do are accelerating innovation, simplifying compliance, improving operational efficiency, and creating happier customers. Better data accelerates digital transformation. This is why we created Adlib Elevate, a scalable AI-based data enrichment platform designed to help businesses get greater access to quality data in an efficient way, enabling businesses to leverage the power of unstructured data to fuel process automation and extract actionable business intelligence. So how does this work? Adlib Elevate can connect to a variety of content repositories to discover documents, word processing, images, emails, spreadsheets, and other unstructured content, then analyze the metadata and actual content to identify high-value or potentially risky data. Convert a wide breadth of file formats into high-quality text-searchable digital assets that are ideal for easy access, classification, extraction, and long-term preservation. Dynamically create unique file fingerprints and utilize machine learning to automatically group similar documents. Digitally capture, OCR, and extract information for analytics, sensitive data detection, redaction, and insights. Deliver high-quality structured data to surface insights and drive automation. Transform your business today. Start winning with better data. To get started.
All right, we'll just turn that last part off. So this is a video that we've got on YouTube, so that's available for people that want to see that again another day, but hopefully that made a little bit of sense. The messaging there should be consistent with what I was describing. So those are the kinds of use cases that we're talking about. Again, because this is a generic video, it doesn't speak to specific industry challenges because they vary so widely across the different markets. But we've touched on a couple, and I'll use a couple of other examples as we continue to go through this. And we'll get to Luis's demo here pretty quick. So I know it's death by PowerPoint, but hopefully this is a bit enlightening in terms of some of the things that are possible out there. So what I mentioned before, I'll maybe skip this because I did talk to this from the earlier slide, but when we talk about getting access to better data, it's that combination of access to high quality data in an efficient way. The different discovery tools, the multiple source connectors, the different file types that you can support around dealing with full access to your content. I mentioned some of the quality concerns around making sure that the fidelity is really good. At a very simple level, even the OCR quality, that's one of the things that, even though it's a fairly simple thing, there's lots of OCR tools out there. One of the big things that our customers tell us is that the quality of the OCR is one of the key decision factors for them. If you don't have access to that high quality searchable content, you can't then dive in and do some of the analytics, especially if you're doing certain pattern searching, or if you've got columns of content where, for example, the example I often use from a customer is they had a credit card number that started at the bottom of one column and continued at the top of the next. We need to fix the flow of that content so that you can actually get that pattern to match, for example. So those are all key elements of getting high quality data out of your system. And then efficiency, being able to run this in a platform environment where you've got dynamic workflows that can be built, run, and adjusted. The idea that the platform can then link out and extend to other systems. So again, linking a platform like Adlib to SharePoint, or linking it to even other technologies that perform certain operations within an overall digital transformation process, are all elements of doing these use cases in an efficient way. So moving forward, I touched on this before, and we'll revisit this a little bit and talk specifically about SharePoint after Luis's demo. But the use cases that we see, and again, this spans industries, fall into these kind of 4 categories. And the descriptions at the top are relatively generic. You see every company talk about that, fueling innovation, enhancing experiences, simplifying compliance, improving operations. We tried to highlight a couple of examples underneath of what we were talking about. And I mentioned some of these earlier. The idea that if you can actually tap into all of that data that you've got, structured and unstructured, you can illuminate opportunities for new product or service offerings. So I talked about the oil and gas example, some of the know your customer. Those are things that can actually fuel innovation or drive new products and services. A big push for a lot of organizations, especially in the FinServ side of the world, are around driving that customer experience, because there's all these digital upstarts, these young born online companies that are moving very quickly, that have got mobile experiences. It's all born online, it's all born digital. But major organizations have got that, but they've also got this bounty and risk associated with all of their historical content as well. And they're struggling to mobilize all of that so they can deliver the information that customers are looking for, the responses that they need in real time to deliver that better customer experience. So that's a big push behind a lot of the use cases that we're seeing getting funded. Compliance is another challenge too, right? It's a daunting problem. So simplifying the compliance, shining a light on and exposing the content that you've got so that you can identify where you might have risks, so that you can then act on that content and perform remediation if you need to, put some security or controls around it, that kind of thing. Automating certain processes that normalize the regulatory publishing, for example. Those kinds of things all help contribute to simplifying compliance. We touched on GDPR earlier as well. Improving operations, operational efficiency is one of those generic terms, but we do find that there are use cases that are very much focused on just improving internal operations. They're not directly tied to some of these other ones. So, there might be internal legacy systems where you've got users that are just, they have to go through multiple systems to find stuff, or you've got legacy systems or repositories that you need to clean up. You've got manual processes that you need to automate so that you can actually improve those internal efficiencies and do more with less, essentially, is the common phrase, but it really is possible. And whether you're talking about RPA, again, that's sort of the latest buzzword, or even the promise of content services foundationally, what SharePoint is intended to offer, it's meant to improve those internal efficiencies and operations so that you can do more faster, essentially. These are a couple of the use cases that I touched on. So the digital capture, conversion, rec, and publishing. So those are some standard things. Being able to make content searchable, make it accessible, normalize it to PDFA for long-term archival is an example. There's a number of examples of use cases there. Sensitive data discovery, we've talked about that a couple of times. The idea of intelligent data migration, and what we're referring to there is that difference between ETL, the extract, transfer, and load, the lift and shift type of approach, to actually doing more intelligent data migration. So it's not just moving stuff from one repository to another. A lot of these big organizations that we work with have got big M&A activity, right? So you inherit all this content, and you need to get that into your system so you can actually leverage the IP that you just purchased. So instead of just lifting and shifting that content in, there's a real opportunity to clean it up. The metadata is often spotty, if not incorrect, so automating the classification and tagging of that content, enriching the metadata so that we can become that much more searchable and accessible, making content searchable in the first place. A lot of non-searchable content, making that as simple as making that a searchable file, and then enriching the metadata. All those things are components of, clean up your data, enrich it, and then move it into your repository. So there's a real opportunity there. Don't just lift and shift, move and improve is a phrase we've used before. And in contract analytics, that varies depending on the industry that you're in. There's lease agreements and land agreements in oil and gas. There's lots of contracts in banking and insurance. You got claims and policies. There's lots of different types of contracts, but all of them benefit from analytics being performed, especially on when you start to tap into some of the legacy stuff that you need to get a better understanding of, so that you can actually, again, look for opportunities for new products and services, understand where you might have risk, trigger other processes that could be automated. There's a number of things around contract analytics that we find in terms of use cases, and again, it spans multiple industries. A couple of slides here, just dive in a little bit deeper. Again, this isn't a highly technical slide. The message here, for the most part, is that you've got this massive volume of unstructured content at the top. There's a number of operations you can perform to basically create clean, structured data from unstructured document formats to deliver on some of those promises that I mentioned before, the innovations, the improved customer experiences, simplified compliance, and operational efficiency. And those are driving some meaningful ROI. Sometimes they're difficult, but increasingly they're quite easy to measure the ROI on these things. Customer experience, how do you measure that? A lot of companies have got customer retention rates, for example, that if you can deliver a better experience, you'll see percentage improvements in your retention rates, which are easy to then start to apply dollar values to. So there is meaningful value behind a lot of these use cases. And from a path perspective, you'll see some of this in Luis's demo, and you saw a little bit in the animation as well. We start with this dark data, all this unstructured content that might be in different systems. It might not be searchable. It might not contain clear metadata, but through a process, you can actually clean and enrich that content so that it can actually be used. So going through discovery, conversion, OCR, maybe publishing, doing some classification, doing some targeted extraction of data or values from that content. These are all things that are kind of on the path from dark data to something that becomes a really usable asset at the other end. This you saw in the animation as well. The notion here is that there's multiple connectors. There's a series of processes that your content can go through, and it doesn't have to go through every one of these steps. The workflow determines which pieces actually need to be executed. The idea is that it comes from multiple sources and can go out to multiple sources. In this case, you see all the different repositories, and having that get published out or shared out to SharePoint, OneDrive, whatever other repository that you want. Just to maybe make this point at this stage here, Adlib is not another repository. So we're sort of repository agnostic. We're this sort of scalable enterprise platform that allows you to plug into and support multiple business systems. But you've all got enough repositories already. We're about sort of enriching the content and then passing it to whatever system of record that you want. I imagine a lot of you on the call are actually moving to or have already got SharePoint. So that would be where this clean and enriched data and content would end up. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and get away from PowerPoint for a second and let Luis do a quick demo for you.
Thank you very much, Scott. So good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, North America. So, well, that was really enriching. That was a lot of information. I know that you are excited and there's a lot of things that we can go through. So what I want to do is I want to show you a couple of the things that we have in here. You should be able to see my screen. In my screen, I have a really basic SharePoint site where we actually load some files in there. So my goal here is going to be to show whatever documents we have present in here. We are going to use our Adlib interface so we can connect to these guys. And what we are going to be able to see, and this is already mapped in here. So we have a connector that we go from this connector goes and connects to SharePoint. It crawls the information. It triggers all the things that we have in there, and we actually locate these files. Now, as you can see, we have not much information about these files. We know the name, but this is not really descriptive. We want to know what is the content in there. So one thing that we can do is that we can actually go there, and because we are so good at creating a PDF, we are really, really good at OCRing, so we understand what's the flow of the document and the information that is happening in there. We can actually go there and retrieve information from that, and that's the next step. That's what Elevate is about. So what I want to show you here is that our documents are going to be present in Elevate, and we can see the data that is in there. Now, for the sake of this presentation, I already convert this to PDF, but something I want to mention is that we can actually ingest different file types, such as Word documents, LST files, and some legacy files like Lotus that we can convert to PDF and make it readable in any kind of a device that you are using. It. So it can go to a phone, to a tablet. It's just the accessibility that you have and the mobility that we need at this point. So within these documents, we have some values that are going to be important. So you have two options at this point. If you have thousands and thousands of these files, you have the option to hire a number of people that are going to go open one file. It's going to retrieve the policy number, it's going to retrieve the policy changes effective date, and it's going to get the company name, and then inject these values to the SharePoint site. Or you can use Elevate and automatize this process, and you can actually get a better use of the people's time in this kind of scenario. Now, once again, we are actually retrieving the files from our SharePoint in here, and we are actually ingesting to our Elevate platform. So what we can do once we have retrieved this thing, we can get the proper view. We retrieve this information. We select all the documents, and I have built some workflows. The workflows are composed from different engines. Those are microprocesses that we did in there. So pretty much what happens is we can unpack file, a package in there. So let's say that you have a zip file. We can extract the data. We can present that one. We can OCR it. We extract the information, and the way that we extract this information, we have two ways. We can have form-based templates that we know that in each scenario is going to be in the same location. That is one way to do it. That is very useful for financial services where they have structured documents, and we know that they are in there, but we need to extract the data. The other way that we do it, and this is the way that I'm going to do it today, is with regular expressions. So we go across the whole document, we locate some patterns, and we filter the information that we have in there. So if you look at the document, we are going to see that we have different dates within the document, but we are only extracting the document that the information that we are interested in. So with this, I have created a workflow that is called Amplify. We submit it to our workflow, and what is going to happen is that our engines are going to be working on the back end, and we have a way to manage this thing. Now, this is more on the technical side, but what I want to show you here is the workflow. The workflow, it's in here, and it's composed by different engines that are able to do all these tasks when they are being triggered. So we can do PDF processing, text search engines, and check enable forms. We can do a lot of these tasks at this point. So we have finished with our retrieval of the information. So we can see that everything is populated in here. The first step that I want to do is that this is something that we not only extract the information, but we classify these documents according to what it is in there. So you can see here in the document type, it's something that I named 01 endorsement. So this is going to be one type of document that we're going to have. If we go to the second document, and this is using the same regular expressions, you are going to see that this document is different to the first one. We have a logo at the top, the chart is different, and the location of the information is in a different place. If we go to the next one, that's why it's called 02 endorsement as the document type. If we go to the next one, this is pretty similar to the first one that I showed you. So it looks similar, but we can tell that the name is different in here. So we know that it's a different contract, that it's a different person in there, and so on. So we have at least 4 types of documents, which we kind of classify in here. So we have 01, 02, 01, 02, 03, 04 documents. So those are going to be the way that we are going to classify. We have extracted the policy change date, the name insured, this is the contract done to, and the policy number. Now, what is important in here is that our SharePoint connector was able to go to our website, retrieve that information, and then we actually run it against our environment. We extract that data, and we actually feed it back to the system. We have our PDFs in here, and we provide that information as metadata that we fill the columns that we have in this place. So now this is enriched. It's going to be highly searchable. It's going to be located, and you are able to do this with thousands and thousands of files at the same time. So instead of going and open and entering these values manually, you can actually see that this is already done for you. And we can automatize that with workflows, with engines, and with different settings in there. So just to set some examples in there, I recently was talking with a customer on the life sciences area, They have a doc base. This is undocumented where they are in lockdown mode because there's no need to modify that doc base anymore. However, this is still accessible to some of their investigators because they need access to these files. They don't know what they have in there. So what is happening is that a researcher goes there, open a bunch of documents, fish for the information that he's looking for, and then move it to a different doc base. So this is, I had to say, is not a very efficient use of the time of the researcher. It is a way to maintain a doc base that doesn't need to be there, but if you know that information, you can actually save that time. So this is just an example for life sciences. We can go to financial services, we can go to energy. We have different ways to see these things. So the beauty of this is that we can ingest any type of file that you can imagine. Those ones that you don't have the application to open the document nowadays, we converted a PDF that is going to be retaining all the information that is in there. And now you can understand and you can read the information. You can actually put it on your metadata and you can make it more usable for the data decisions that you need to do in a day-on-day basis. So that's I can keep going on the demo, but I think it is going to be a better use of your time to go back to our presentation. I think this is going to raise a lot of questions, so I'm more than happy to answer. At the end, we are going to have the question and answers. And
maybe just a quick point there, Luis, too. I know we talk a lot about PDF, but essentially we've got a number of use cases where the customers actually don't want PDF in the end. So, we can normalize all these different formats and then extract the value from it, but then that can be recombined as metadata with the source files. So you've got the option essentially. So some people, the PDF is just a throwaway. It's kind of a means to an end. We don't rely on PDF, but it's a great way of basically taking any format, legacy or otherwise, and getting that into something that you can perform the analytics, get the extracted values from, and then recombine that data with the source files if you want. And then you've got options to do both. Whether you want to do just the source files or those plus PDFs, you've got options there for sure.
Absolutely correct. So thank you for that. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So it is true. We can actually use the PDF to extract the data, but you can keep the original document that you have in there. So.
All right, thanks, Luis.
Yep.
So we've only got a few more slides. We're at about almost 40 minutes past the hour, so not too many more. We want to try and finish up here within the next 5 or 10 minutes, so that there's an opportunity for questions or to buy you all back 15 minutes of time to go back to your days. But as I mentioned, we wanted to come back to this sort of the business impact. So reiterated some of these 4 categories before. But when we talk about some examples for SharePoint, creating sort of clean, accessible documents and data in SharePoint gives full access to those insights that the users of SharePoint might then be able to do to find content, find patterns and insights so that they can deliver new products and services to their customers. Enhancing experience, this one here, because I've been in this industry for too long, some would say, but one of the challenges with content management systems way back in the day, or even to this day, is around user adoption. So when we talk about enhancing customer experience, it's often around how do you do a better job for automating some of your external customer journeys. But for those of you on the call, this is also about, and we've seen this with a number of customers, it's also about enhancing your internal customers' experiences as well. So if they struggle to find the information they're looking for, or there's duplicate content, or they can't find it because the metadata wasn't proper or the content isn't searchable, it affects the adoption of some of these systems. So we've got a couple of use cases where they're trying to move people, wean them off of the practice of saving documents locally or using email or doing these things and relying on their SharePoint system to get access to the content and leverage the collaboration, all the different values and benefits of SharePoint. So another big outcome of this is if you can get really enriched content into SharePoint, you're enhancing your internal users' experience and the adoption of the platform. So that's a key thing that we've seen as well. But certainly the other part of this story is that if you've got access to the information that you need to make business decisions, your knowledge workers, then essentially they can get the answers that customers need, customers, suppliers, whatever that is. Access to that information means that they can do a better job, a faster job at getting that stuff out. And you've got increased opportunities to automate some of these things too. So I'm not going to go off on a separate webinar talking about artificial intelligence and RPA and the loss of jobs, that kind of thing. I mean, it's really about automating the mundane so that you can have the knowledge workers focus on the humane. This is something that I've been saying internally, but you hire a claims processor in insurance to process claims and have empathy for the customer and to do some of the deeper analytics that maybe technology can't quite do yet. But if you can free up their time to do more of that, process more customer claims, go deeper, and automate some of the things. You don't pay a claims processor to be a document worker, moving content from one place to another, or spending 10, 20% of their time searching for information. That's not valuable for you or the customers in the end. So if you can automate some of those things through this approach, you can see some really meaningful benefits at in the end. Compliance, obviously, we talked a little bit about this, sensitive data, such as PII, but it's not just personally identifiable information. It can also be the CCI, the corporate confidential information, your IP, formulas. There's different information that, especially if you're dealing with M&A, you want to package up a whole bunch of everything associated with an asset, an organization, a division, and send that off to whoever the acquirer is. You want to give them all of the IP that they're entitled to, but none of the stuff that they're not. So again, if you don't have visibility into your content, you can't slice and dice your content in a meaningful way to actually do some of those things. And it's not just about being able to identify where is my risk, it's also then being able to act on it. So doing things like redaction or sequestering it into a different location so that it's the rights management tools and things that are out there that Adlib does not do can take control over that information and apply some controls around it. But it starts with having the visibility into that content in the first place. And then the operations, again, intelligent process automation throughout the content lifecycle, accelerating workflows, giving time back to the business. There's different stages, content coming into SharePoint, internal workflows and collaboration that go on, exporting stuff or sending stuff, publishing it out from SharePoint to either another system or out to customers and suppliers. All of those things, there's opportunities there for automation that rely on that combination, basically, of automation and data so that they can do things much more efficiently, essentially. So we haven't really talked about Adlib. So there's just a couple of last-minute slides here around, well, who are we? So hopefully some of you have heard about Adlib. We've been around for a while. The next slide actually talks a little bit more about the company, but we have got some interesting recognition. So Forrester recognized us as a strong performer on the file analytics wave last year. And Gartner, and so you see some of the different recognitions here, the Gartner Content Services extensions, but more importantly, the Market Guide to File Analysis software. So that kind of space is where we fit, but we plug into, as I've been talking about throughout, the content services ecosystems like SharePoint, the Insight engines, the RPA vendors. There's a bunch of different technologies that all rely on clean, high-quality, unstructured data, and it's hard to get at. So that's kind of the place that we play in. A mix of customers here, basically just showing that it spans industries here. Our focus has been on fintech, so banking and insurance for the most part, oil, gas, and energy, and then in the life sciences space, pharma and med devices. Those are obviously content-intensive industries, and they're also highly regulated. So they've got some pretty big pain points around their unstructured content that Adlib can address. So that's where a lot of our customers come from. And a little bit more about us. We've been around for quite a while, incorporated in '98, sort of commercially on the market since early 2000. About 100 people. We've got locations obviously here in Canada. Hopefully you noticed my accent, but we also have European presence as well. And as I just mentioned, we've got focus in those three target industries, but the nature of what we do and the nature of the problem means that we've got customers in government, manufacturing, a bunch of different kinds of industries. And as indicated here, we're proud to be a charter member of the Microsoft Content Services Partner Program, which I think came along last year. So just in summary, that's a repeat of the image that I had earlier, just this idea of the create, coordinate, protect, and harvest, the four pillars of the Microsoft Content Services Platform. And we've seen that this ability to discover, convert, publish, classify, and extract information plugs really nicely into what they're basically going to market with in terms of not just their messaging, but their solutions. I've got a relatively long link there to the Microsoft page. If you go to adlibsoftware.com and under solutions, you'll see the Microsoft link there, so you can see a little bit more information. The animation, I believe, is up there. It's probably under the platform, under Adlib Elevate. You'll see the animation there. And you're welcome to reach out to us if you have any questions as well. Another little I don't want to say treat, but something else that isn't linked to our main site is this whybetterdata.com is a new little microsite that we've got. So I encourage you to go and check that out. It works great on a mobile device, and I think that's about it from a presentation perspective. Hopefully that was enlightening. You know, you're all in this space. You all know content services, but hopefully with some of the use cases that I threw out there, there were a couple of ideas that were generated. And if you have any questions, as we've mentioned, there's some addresses here on this page, and we'll see if there's any questions on the webinar itself. Shane?
Thank you, Scott and Lewis, for a great presentation. Yeah, we will now start the questions and answers part. So should you wish to ask Lewis or Scott a question, type it into the questions window. Okay, first question up. Can you describe a use case for what you described versus a standard extract, transfer, and load when migrating content?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think I touched on that earlier in the presentation, but there's a lot of people, and the temptation is, you know, you want to get the content into SharePoint, for example, as quickly as possible. So, you know, there's tools out there that will plug into different repositories and do a quick lift and shift. It'll grab the content, it'll take whatever metadata and whatever condition it's in, and map that over to the end result. The challenge that we find with our customers is that it's that flow of garbage, I suppose, is that there's a lot of opportunity. Even if stuff was created and managed in a content management system before, we find there's a huge degree of inconsistency and redundancy even within those systems. So, you know, if you put that, I'll call it the mess, into your new system, you've missed out on a real opportunity to enrich that content to basically get some of the business benefits out of it. You know, we've had a couple of projects, one where the customer had it was 1 million files from one of their divisions, and it was 35% duplication in their content. So it was a real opportunity to clean that stuff up. And we've also seen a lot of examples where the metadata is it's spotty. When they do their spot checks, they even find documents that had a particular document type. When they did some manual verification, they were incorrectly profiled because we're human, right? So you got different people that may no longer be with the organization, and the values are different. You can actually teach technology to do a better job at giving that a true and consistent application of their content. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Does the solution do more than act on content being ingested into SharePoint?
Yeah, so we talked about a few examples there. I mean, the ingestion was part of what we set up for this webinar in particular, because a lot of people are migrating the content from other systems into SharePoint. But as we've kind of highlighted throughout, there's all these different use cases or workflows that are ripe for automation. So whether that's you know, accelerating a customer journey by improving the access to that data so you can accelerate decisions essentially, the regulatory compliance automation, you know, there's different things quite outside of ingesting content into SharePoint that tapping into a platform such as Adlib, and there's other technologies out there that do bits and pieces of this, but there are lots of other use cases that can be applied, and that's why we kind of focused on those 4 areas of business impact, essentially. The you know, opportunities for innovation, the new products and services, improving customer experience, there's use cases there, simplifying compliance, there's a number of stories there, and different lines of business, obviously, that care about these different areas. And then the operational efficiency, which is very much an IT story, but you know, we've got even a simple case of a customer with 8 different technologies sort of doing some similar things, but some were desktop tools, some were utilities, some were embedded technologies and other platforms. And being able to consolidate all that into a single scalable platform that can sort of consistently and reliably perform all those operations in an automated way takes those functions away from the users who don't want them in the first place, and introduces a lot of opportunity for cost savings and efficiency. So yeah, lots of use cases outside of migration.
Okay, 2-part question here. Are document types equal to SharePoint content types? And if not, can content be assigned to content types automatically via your product?
Document types are not necessarily, if I remember this rightly, they're disconnected. So you can have a content type or a document type that might be, you know, the Word file, but there's all kinds of different agreements or invoices or HR documents. They're completely disconnected. And one of the benefits is that quite outside of the file format, the extension, and even the metadata, we can start to auto-classify and tag content and enrich the metadata based on the content inside it. So we basically are deep inside this content, understanding what it is, and can identify what is similar. So one of the interesting tests that we actually had in applying for and getting the strong results for the Forrester Wave was they sent us a bunch of sample documents, and they had some hidden content in there, and they had renamed the files to something that didn't represent the actual format. So they might have named a doc file to XLS or something like that, put white on white text, did some things to sort of trick it. But because we go deep inside the content, we look at the actual header information, we don't care as much about the extension. We go into the content itself, know exactly what the format is, go inside and find the content, whether it's white on white or otherwise. We're still able to find and do the different operations on it. So we can disconnect the format from the actual content type. So a contract, for example, could be PDF, it could be Word, it could be a TIFF image, but if there's certain common elements within that in terms of language or layout, we can group those things and tag them all consistently. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. In which geolocation is the processing metadata extraction happening, and is the data stored there? Asking regarding personal data, GDPR issues, and European GDPR regulations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the security concerns, the data sovereignty issues and whatnot are an interesting challenge. So the software itself operates on-prem or in the cloud or in a hybrid environment. So you can do a combination of on-prem and in the cloud. And that can be private cloud. That's the primary way that we do it. Again, dealing with all these, G2000 organizations, they don't really want to have their content flowing through public cloud infrastructure. So it's mostly private cloud types of environments. But even that is still the minority. A lot of these people are still doing, because of the nature of what we're touching and working with, they're still doing these quite often in on-prem or in private cloud types of environments. And you can choose and configure where the processing happens. Obviously, if it's on-prem, that one's self-contained. But even if you're doing private cloud, you can actually control where that processing is happening. So if it's in Germany, you can sort of focus it there, so you avoid the data sovereignty challenges there. But when we're talking about some of this really sensitive content containing PII or even their own corporate IP, we're finding some hesitancy. It's changing, but there's still quite a bit of hesitancy of processing this stuff up in a cloud environment. They still prefer to do it in an on-prem, still scalable, but an on-prem type of environment.
Mm-hmm. That's understandable. Okay, how would you handle file server services if the target need to remain in the file services and searchable?
So I think that's a good point. So a lot of the way I describe the story here is that you're pulling it from one place and putting it somewhere else. But we've got lots of sort of in-place types of use cases as well, right? Where they want to sort of say, I don't want to move it, I just want to enrich the stuff that I've got. So whether it's file shares or something else, because quite often there's other processes or other systems that are tapping into that content, and moving it, breaks something. So there is an opportunity to take the files as they are, essentially, process them, enrich them essentially, and place them back in the location. So if you want to put them back in your file share, fill your boots. If it's coming from SharePoint and going back into SharePoint, then that would be fine as well. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, feel free to throw up another one, a clarifying one. But yeah, it's not just about moving stuff from one place to another. It could be about cleaning and enriching something in place, essentially.
Great. And I'm assuming that if anybody wants to reach out to you, Scott, they can do at your contact details there if they have any questions from today's webinar.
Yes, for sure. I didn't put my personal email address up there. I suppose I could have, but if you send it into info@adlibsoftware.com, they know where to find me.
Great.
So we're happy to follow up on those.
Brilliant. On behalf of the ESBC community, thank you, Scott and Lewis, for taking the time today to complete this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Was a real pleasure, so have a good one.
Great. And by the way, there's plenty of praise in here. Great presentation, great demo, great presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So loads of people sending in their thanks to both to Scott and Lewis. So thank you all for that. Okay, everybody. Great. Thank you all for joining us today. Just the to wrap up, the next upcoming webinar is taking place on Tuesday, March 19th, and this is Cloud Strategy for Your Organization, Migrating Workflows to PaaS. Join us also, if you can, at sharepointeurope.com/resource-center, where we have details of all upcoming webinars and all previous webinars. Thank you all for joining us today, and a big thank you to Scott and Lewis. Take care and goodbye.